Okay, we got Lance Russell on the line. Lance, how you doing today?
Hey, Dave. How you doing, partner?
Hey, we're doing really well. We're doing really good. I want to read you this. God, let me get this letter. I want to read you this. We're going to start out by something real nice. You're going to really enjoy this email we got from, let me get it right here. It is from Chris Mills of Jackson, Mississippi, who, like many people, grew up watching you. And he just says, Mr. Russell, I just wanted to take a few minutes to write this note and thank you for a few things. I grew up an hour south of Memphis, and for a long time, I thought that the only good wrestler in the world was Jerry Lawler, and the only good wrestling announcer was you. Well, since that time, my opinion on wrestling has changed, but not my on wrestlers has changed, but not my opinion on announcers. So from the Here We Go Davey to By Golly, I never got enough. My grandfather, my father, and me, the love of wrestling was the one big thing that brought us together, and it was you who brought it into our living room every Saturday morning. I had the pleasure of meeting you backstage at the Mid-South Coliseum during Monday Night Memories in Memphis. I remember being really nervous walking up to you, and then totally at ease when I shook your hand and you talked to me and my wife as if you've known us for years. Thank you for your kindness and for being the greatest voice in the greatest sport in the world. Chris Mills, Jackson, Mississippi. So,
what a good guy.
Yeah.
That's great, Dave. I appreciate you taking time to read it. That is something. Chris Mills, how about that?
Yeah.
That was a good night, the night he was referring to, the Memories night. We had a lot of fun with a lot of guys that hadn't seen each other in a long time, and it was probably better that way. We did have a lot of fun.
Looking back, I mean, we were thinking about this before you came on. 50 years in this business.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, it's like, what would you say? I mean, would be the biggest change, and would you say, because I would think this, that like the last 3 years has been the biggest change period of any last 3-year period in history?
I think that's probably true in terms of pure change. It goes back, as you know, better than anybody before that time when the change started, and it really came, I think, when Vince made the comments to the Athletic Commission to get out from under taxes and that sort of stuff, and all of the kayfabe by the board and all of that. I mean, that made it totally different. It made it almost necessary to come up with an entirely different product after that took over. Don't you think?
I don't know.
Maybe not.
I think it's maybe I don't know if it did, but the public changed, and then when they started pushing it really quick, I think the competition just made everybody try to come up with the next new idea so fast that the business just started moving really, really fast. I don't know. Mm-hmm. One of the things that when I watch Raw, it's funny because a lot of the stuff that they do, people talk about like the short matches and long interviews and things like that, like it's something new.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I remember, 1982, Memphis, glory days of Memphis.
Sure.
I mean, you were built around some great talkers. You had your matches in the ring, but the matches weren't necessarily long, and it was the interviews that sold the tickets.
That's true. And who was sitting right there, tooth and toenail, fighting it just as hard as I could, because I used to tell Jerry Jarrett and Lawler and the guys, we're not getting enough wrestling in there, and I just was convinced because I was a real wrestling fan, and I thought that was it. But I learned as time went by that exactly what you said was true, that really the people enjoyed seeing the confrontations and the setting up of confrontations and all that as much as they did seeing wrestling in the ring. So there's no doubt that we had we were doing just exactly the same thing that they are doing today with the short matches and long interviews, but we had some good mouths, and that's what made it work. A lot of it.
Going back, do you have any, you probably have so many, but any memories that stand out, whether it be a match you saw or just a night at the Coliseum or a television angle or anything that just where you just go this was, out of all these years, these are some moments that really stand out?
Well, there's a lot of them that stand out. I've told a story so many times that everybody should have heard it, and that is about asking what the favorite match, and that was the tag team match when Inoki and Hiro Matsuda went after the NWA tag titles held by Eddie Graham and Sam Steamboat. And they did it on television, and I couldn't really believe that it was happening before my very eyes and mouth, and they ended up, and Eddie got injured in the first fall, and Sam went ahead and took over and defended it, and the Japanese team ended up winning the tag belts, and then they had, of course, a series of matches after that, and they took it down to Florida and did it. They did it in Memphis, and then they took it down to Florida, too. That probably was one of the most exciting bouts that I've ever seen. It was just absolutely spectacular, particularly the first fall when the four of them were all in there. But there have been a lot of other things. I tell you, people think this is crazy, but one of the things that really knocked me out, as I remember, is when Dave and I were faced with that Dr. Frank box that Lawler had conceived, and we had the noises sitting when the box was sitting beside us. It was kind of a fun thing, a totally different thing than the tag match that I was talking about.
That's totally different. Oh my God.
Huh?
That's totally. Yeah, Doctor. I just want to kind of recreate the thing because I've seen it. It was like a box, and was it like Lawler bringing out like a mystery tag team partner or something?
Yeah, well, they brought the box out without really any conversation about it, and Dave and I were sitting there saying, "What the Sam Hill is in that box?" It was like something that we didn't know anything about. And people don't believe that, and that's okay too. But we didn't know anything about it. We just winged it, and the way it came, that's the way it was, and that primarily is the way it worked. Well, the box is sitting there, and then we started hearing these noises start coming from the box, and so then we kind of got into the whole act, and finally got the door open. Here's Dr. Frank comes walking out of
For a product that you're trying to sell as legitimate, sometimes things like Dr. Frank, I don't know. I can see that more. I can see that more today when like on a Vince Russo show than like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like basically for people to know, Dr. Frank was a guy dressed like Frankenstein,
That's
sitting there in a box.
Yeah.
And they opened up the box, and there was like Frankenstein as some tag team partner.
Yeah. That's exactly what he did. He came on the scene as that, and it was amazing. But Dave, there seemed to be, because this is kind of the way that Dave Brown and I felt about the thing, there seemed to be a period of time when they would bring out these various things, and we had all kind of characters. But then we would say, okay, this is the fun and games time. We didn't really say that, but by the action and the things that took place. And people kind of seemed to separate that. It was different than Jerry Lawler looking down his nose at Bill Dundee and saying, "I'll cut your wife's hair off." And everybody knew that they were dead serious about it, and they were just two different kinds of things that happened, and people seemed to be able to separate them with no problem at all. They liked it that way. And they didn't try to confuse the Dr. Frank with the Green Brothers against whoever, or Lawler and Dundee, or whoever it might be.
One of the things you just brought up when they shaved Bill Dundee's wife at the time's hair.
Ooh.
What was that like going in? Because that was, even by Memphis standards, and I know it had happened before with Gorgeous George, but by that standard, shaving a woman's head in the ring was pretty different.
Yeah.
And how'd she do? And how'd they get her to agree to it?
Well, I don't know. Dundee took care of that. Unfortunately, that was not a job that I had, that's for sure. But I'll tell you what was really the odd thing. When Lawler ends up winning the match, and it was time for Bev Dundee's head to be shaved, and we had a barber who was an old-timer, had a barber shop in Memphis for years and years, and he did all of our hair cutting. And he was always nervous when he got in the ring, because he thought, one of these big monsters who was going to sit down and crush him totally to death, you know. So he was really nervous about it. Well, he was particularly nervous when it came the task to shave Bev Dundee's head. And he got up there and he grabs her hair, and let's say that her hair is 9 inches long, and he pulls up, and everybody, yeah, no, don't do that, don't cut her hair, you know. And he's hearing all of this conversation, and so he clips off about 1.5 inches of that 9 inches. And then he goes to another spot, no, don't cut her hair, and he does the same thing once again. And then it went on for about 3 or 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden, the music changed. Boo! Cut her hair! They got hot at him because he wasn't cutting the hair off, you know. And so we're up there saying, Mr. Callan, cut the hair. Take some hair off of her head. It was really funny. You hear the comedy routine about, boy, they can turn on us tonight in a minute, you know. Well, that's the way this was. They turned on everybody because they resisted having her hair cut, but then when they didn't cut the hair, and that's what they came to see, they wanted it the other way. So they ended up cutting. They didn't do her bald the way they did the guys, but he did cut off a good bit more to save our lives.
This is from JP in San Francisco. It's got a lot of questions for you, Lance.
Okay.
It says you probably have one of the best vantage points in the evolution of professional wrestling of anyone. What elements or characteristics of pro wrestling that have kind of disappeared over the years would you like to see brought back? Like things that they don't do anymore that they used to do that you kind of miss?
Well, I think, you know, I might change my mind after I got my wish, but I think I would rather have it go back to the way it was in the 60s and the 70s than it is now. And you know, I don't know whether it's something that just automatically comes with getting old or what it is, but it's just, you know, all the old timers that I know, and I don't know any hardly but old timers anymore. It seems like we all feel the same way, that it was a better product, and we were a lot more proud to be involved with it and all, and so that's one thing that I would like to see. Dave, any comments? Do you hear that? Do you hear that often or not?
As far as like the in-ring work or just everything in general?
You hear that?
I don't really think you can separate the two of them to get what I'm to arrive at a product that I'm talking about. I mean, this is a product that the fans lived and breathed with, and don't be bringing up any of this stuff about phony or anything like that. While there's an awful lot of high flyers, and I know that attracts the audience today, and they really go in for that. Although I don't know why, I get the feeling that maybe we've almost satiated the appetite for high flyers and stunt machines and that kind of thing, and maybe people are interested in a little more basic wrestling, as I think it was referred to. I don't think you can hardly separate the in-ring thing from the outside product, because the attitude in relationship to the product, I guess, is what I'm talking about. And that probably would be the biggest thing that I would like to see come back. I'd have to think a long time about some other things. I know that there are some things that I would just as soon not see. I think the product has gotten far too racy and is just depending on too much sex and that sort of thing. And it has, again, as all the old timers say, what are they doing putting the word wrestling up on the marquee? Because they have so very little of it. I don't know. I can't right offhand. I can't think of anything else that I would like to see come back. And I don't know, I really don't know that I would like everything that took place back in the era that I was talking about to come back. I went to see the last Pensacola, Florida WWF show, and I really enjoyed myself. It was the first time, Dave, that I had been to a house show in quite some time. And I, probably went in there with a little resentment the way the product had changed and saying, it was a lot better in our days and all that. And I really enjoyed watching all the stuff that went down. And some good athletes were on the floor too. So I certainly am not knocking all of the product that they're putting out today. That's for sure.
Yeah, the last time I went to a WWF house show, I mean, I enjoyed pretty much like maybe every match, but one or two. And I mean, even the ones that I would say weren't good in their own way, they were entertaining.
That's right. And it escapes me at this time. Gee, how can that happen? But I'm trying to think, who is it that Brian Christopher works as a tag team partner?
Scotty 2 Hotty?
Yeah, Scotty 2 Hotty.
With
I
a worm.
loved their match. I mean, it was entertaining as the devil. And I've watched Brian for so long, and I just really think that he's a lot better athlete and wrestler than he seems to be in terms of acceptance and all. But that match was just a heck of an entertaining match. And what you said is right. I mean, they're fun stuff. They're really fun stuff.
Now,
I don't know how you compete when they can come out there, and when you can't put on that kind of entertaining stuff, it's hard to compete.
Now, one person asked this. It's actually the same question. This is an interesting thing. You spent years and years and years announcing out of that TV studio. You've done some broadcasting out of the arena setting.
Yes.
What do you think are the pluses and the minuses? Because, pretty much nobody's doing TV studio wrestling. No, I mean, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen a small TV studio. Is there Brian, are there any small TV studio stuffs going around?
I don't think so.
Not with the big companies. I mean, I've watched, sometimes like ECW will tape at a building that only holds 1,000 people.
Yeah.
But that's not like the Memphis TV studio.
No.
I mean,
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, obviously Memphis. I guess Memphis would be the last one, the Randy Hale show.
Mm-hmm.
So as someone who did TV studio wrestling for decades, I mean, what are your thoughts as far as, there are a lot of strengths of the studio, and yet sometimes when I watch the Randy Hale stuff, the studio looks almost like a throwback, which I guess maybe is okay in Memphis because it's so similar to what was always done.
That's right. It's coming essentially out of the same studio that at least half of our time was spent over there at the Scripps Howard station doing it, and the other station, WHBQ, the RKO General station, it was the same thing. It was a studio, and we just transferred the show over to another station. The pluses and minuses of it. There is kind of nothing like doing a show in an arena, and I think it's true of anybody who participates in it. There's nothing like hearing that crowd that responds when you've got one of the big crowds, and particularly if you were doing any of the pay-per-views or anything like that. You hear that big crowd respond, and there's just nothing exactly like that. There's no way to get around it. But on the other side of the coin, when you're talking about working in the small, there is an intimacy. And when the guys walk up and get into a beef with somebody in the crowd, you can feel it, and the people sitting right around it, and almost everybody is sitting right around where it's happening. It brings about an atmosphere of real conflict and irritation, and if it's intended, it brings about that humor. It just seems to be something which does not get over, and they don't really attempt to do, although there is some of it done back and forth between the crowd. And even when they're down, when the guys are having conflict with each other, running their mouths at each other, they're right up next to the people in the studio, and it brings on a different atmosphere. I like that aspect of it. I don't know that I'm really saying that it's more real or not. That isn't really what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that it seems to bring out some more real emotions. I remember more real emotions, because a lot of the stuff that's in front of the big crowds today, the people that are reacting in the crowd are reacting to get at their 15 minutes of fame in front of 5,000-8,000 people, or how many ever people happen to be there. They're trying to get the reaction from the crowd as much as anything. And where in the little studio, they were kind of get the reaction of Jerry Lawler or Bob Armstrong or whoever it was that was wrestling in front of them.
I think that, looking back, from an interview standpoint, it's real different. And I think that the interviews in a studio made for better interviews, because when you're doing the interview in front of like 10,000 people,
yeah.
you're doing like an entertainment promo, because you're trying not to lose the audience, and you're waiting for the audience to respond to what you say, and you're kind of like playing a game with the audience, whereas the promos before, they would look into the camera, and there'd be 50, 100 people there, but you're looking into the camera and you're trying to sell a ticket to the guy on the other side of the screen, whereas the other one, you're trying to do this kind of more like an entertainment thing.
Yeah. I think you're right, Dave, and it's a good point, too, because I think the very fact that the name, and I don't know whether it came from you or who it came from, but that they call them promos now, as opposed to interviews is the way we used to refer to them. And really there was more, at least in our presentation, there was more interview. It wasn't just one person. It was Dave Brown talking to Frank Morrell or whoever it was, and it was Lance Russell talking to Bill Dundee and George Barnes, and it was in fact an interview. Whereas I think today the guys are polished to do what you say, make a showbiz type of promotion, and to call them promos is absolutely right.
Is there ever a moment, or what would it probably was, but is there a moment that you can come up with where you were the most scared, whether it was from a wrestler or something went wrong on TV or the fans getting out of control of the show? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess the most scared that it ever happened to me was a terrifying night. Now, take it back into the 60s, and if you can picture the racial climate that took place in Memphis, Tennessee, well, not only Memphis, but this is what we're talking about is Memphis. Most of the shows that came in there, whatever they were, they had at that time relegated the balconies to the black clientele, and they were not, it was not a totally integrated situation, and as things and the heat started to turn up in the racial front, we had a situation at the old auditorium, which had a big balcony that ran around like so many of the old coliseums and arenas, and somebody dropped knocked a glass or a Coke bottle or something like that off of the balcony down, and it hit a white patron on the head down, and all of a sudden we had ourselves a full-blown racial situation. I mean, it was so ugly that you asked me if I remembered one. I'm telling you one I remember. And I'll tell you the most terrifying moment of all was as everybody cleared out, all the wrestling personnel cleared out and went backstage, and the police were around trying to settle things down and do this, and it just got in. All of a sudden, zing, here comes a knife with a 4-inch blade sailing through the air and hits in the aisle and goes ripping down the aisle along the floor. It didn't hit anybody. And it was just really a terrifying situation. Well, about the time that knife came by, I said, it's time that I get out of here and stop pretending like I've got control. So I ran backstage and back there. But when looking back there, I'm saying, man, we are never going to get this thing out of a real war if we don't put something in there that's going to entertain them. And so, being young and stupid, I went back out to the ring and jumped up in the ring and grabbed the microphone and started doing it, and it started introducing a couple of guys that agreed to go out there and get going in a match. And I'll be a son of a gun, it couldn't have been 3 minutes of time from the time that these guys got in the ring and we rang the bell and the match started till the whole thing settled down. And what was just an absolutely terrifying, ugly situation turned back into what they came there for, was to see a wrestling match where somebody was going to bust somebody else. And so that's one thing that I remember, Dave. Is that kind of what you had in mind?
Yeah, very much so. And I also want to remind everyone that tomorrow on the show we are going to have Missy Hyatt for the first time, which should be a very interesting show. Lance Russell's very familiar with Missy Hyatt.
Yeah, you tell Missy hi for me. I have not seen her in a long time.
I remember when I think of Missy Hyatt on Memphis Wrestling, I don't know if you remember this spot, but you were doing some sort of a trivia thing. And, of course, Eddie Gilbert, who was Missy Hyatt's husband at the time, he knew all the wrestling trivia from Memphis. I don't remember what the question was, but, it was like one of these things. I don't remember the whole thing, but I just remember, it was wrestling trivia, and, Eddie would just come out there, and, the fans were supposed to, write in or call in or something, and Eddie would just give all the answers.
Yeah. Well, Missy gave some of the answers, too. I think
Eddie
brought them out and gave them
Eddie told her. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I do remember that, as a matter of fact, and I think that Missy, every time we used to see each other, bump into each other, we'd bring up that very situation, because it was one of those conflict things. We had an interesting contrast there. Listen, let me ask you a question, Dave, just real quick. What about Brad Armstrong? Is he back where he can work again, or what? I heard about his knee and all.
He's not working yet. Brian, he hasn't worked in months, has he? No, he got run over in the parking lot.
Yeah, I read that in the Observer, and a lot of the Armstrongs live in the area where I'm living now, and so I was particularly interested. Brad was a friend going back a long ways.
Yeah, well, you would have known his father way back.
Sure. Yeah, way back.
From Jerry Lawler, Bob Armstrong feud in Memphis.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Bob, fresh out of the firehouse in Marietta.
That's right. Firefighter from, and he brought it, yeah. We got a full bank of calls. I want to start with JD in Pittsburgh. JD, what's going on?
Hi, Dave. Hi, Lance. Hi, Bri. How you guys doing tonight?
Hi, JD.
All right, I want to talk to you guys about a few things about last night's Thunder Show, if I could. Briefly, I want to talk about one person in particular, Scott Steiner, as far as his actions go. I mean, I understand he's the heel character and all in WCW right now, but I have to ask you, Dave, and maybe you guys could comment on this real quick. Do you think the way his actions have been lately, especially provoking the referee and pushing him, he hasn't been suspended or worse, fined by the WCW? I mean, the rules, you cannot touch an official.
No, I'm sure I'm sure that they're encouraging him to do that for his character, so I wouldn't really worry about that. It's the stuff he does that you don't see that I would worry about, and he does do that.
He goes off the edge a lot. We know that.
Well, maybe that's why it's so believable when he does it on camera, because deep down we know that he possibly really could be doing this. Scott Steiner's
like... should be banned from the crowd.
Well, I understand he's a great heel and everything, but they should take some action with the actions he's been portraying in the ring. I mean, the rules are simple. You do not touch an official when you're in the ring. You do not.
Yeah, if you do
down on it.
You do if you're told to. JD, we got to get running, okay?
See you guys.
Okay, let's go to
that question.
Let's bring in Flair. I'll tell you what, the one thing about Steiner, though, as far as he is probably would you say the only guy, Brian, in today's wrestling that when you watch him on TV and you're watching on a screen and he's thousands of miles away, he's still scary.
Oh, yeah.
That guy is so
Boy, he
I
is
know.
scary, that's for a fact.
I mean, and you could just tell everyone who works with him, and I mean, everyone around, the announcers are scared to death when he's out there wrestling, because they're afraid if, like, what if he hears us say something? I mean, you ever hear, like nobody ever criticizes Scott Steiner as an announcer.
I think
Oh,
they
my.
should let him go in the crowd because one of these days someone's going to spill a pop on him on accident, and he's really going to just destroy him.
Or someone's going to shoot him.
I'm just waiting.
Just out of,
That could happen.
just out of being scared to death. I mean, if that guy came near me and he had like that eye, you know, that eyes look and the way he looks, well, actually I would run. But if you're stuck in a corner, what do you? Oh my God, I don't want to think about that one. Let's go to Don in Long Beach.
Hey, how you doing today?
We're doing really good.
All right. For some reason they call me Don, but my name's Ben, but that's minor.
But that's my problem.
Okay, Dan.
Okay.
Sorry, Dan.
I got a question for you guys. I'm not sure you guys covered this yet, but Rob Van Dam quitting ECW.
Yes. What about?
There's a
Go
rumor
ahead.
that he was backstage at the Long Beach Thunder show.
He absolutely was. That's not a rumor.
Backstage.
He absolutely was, and he was, even though everyone denies it, he was in fact talking to some people and talking about perhaps getting in. Not like you know, I mean, he was more doing it the sly way, where it's like, hey, can I get a job here? It's just sort of like, well, what if? You know, I mean, he was certainly. I mean, it came up to certain people that he knew, but he didn't try to broadcast it or anything like that. But yeah, he was at the Thunder show,
and I didn't see him there. I was backstage hanging out, and I didn't see him at all.
Yeah, he was definitely there.
Wow.
I talked to many people who talked to him.
Okay. I'd kind of like to see him to go to WCW. That way he wouldn't get, like, lost in the shuffle or anything. He could be a major star there.
It depends on who's booking.
That's true.
I mean, if they had a booker who wanted to go with him, you know, I mean, he's a talented guy. If they had someone who wants to go with him, they could. And if they had someone who wants to bury him, you know, they could do that too.
Yeah.
I would think that for him it'd be better in WCW because they need to create a star. Whereas WWF, it's going to be tough. Look at like Raven, and you know, like they just don't. It's getting over in WWF is really tough, and Van Dam's style and what he does, a lot of that stuff he's not going to be able to do in WWF. He's not going to have the leeway to do those moves because they don't want guys getting hurt. You know, and some of those.
Now everyone's focusing on WWF for any type of character violations, and Rob Van Dam, he's been all over the cover of High Times and things like that. And the PCC would have a field day with him.
Man, I think that if they advertised it on television like they do on ECW, yes, for sure. But if they just told him to shut up and don't talk about it, I don't know that would be wrong. Because, you know, you had, not all that long ago, you had the Godfather doing the, you know, and Road Dogg and some of these guys with the T-shirts and with the mannerisms, X-Pac. And, you know, that was only recently. So, and now, you know, they're still around. I think they would just tell him to, like, kind of shut up, you know. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of would like to see him go to WCW. That way they could try and build around him. Him and Lance Storm have some great matches.
They could. But you know, again, like, it depends on who the booker is, because I could see, you know, he'd walk into a situation where you still got enough of that old clique there that doesn't let new guys get, you know, the Luger, Scott Steiner, Nash clique. They don't really let new guys break through to the top very easily. And he's going to be real frustrated because Rob Van Dam, you know, thinks he's a top guy, and you know, and to his credit, based on his ECW, he's not wrong. But they'll have people whispering, you know, hey, you know, he doesn't know psychology, and he doesn't, you know what I mean? You'll hear it, and it depends on if the booker's going to listen. And I don't know, you know, again, you know, Rob Van Dam is much better in 15-minute matches where he can do a lot of stuff.
Right.
The 3-minute match, you know, he's not good at a short match because he's never been asked to do them.
That's very true. Okay. Well, that's all I had.
Okay. You're very welcome. Let's go to Tony in New York. Tony, what's going on?
Guys, how you doing?
Very good.
Hi, Lance.
Hey,
It's
Tony.
a pleasure to talk to you.
Bless your heart. Thank you.
I got to tell you, I have never, ever seen you do a show live, a current show, but I've seen hundreds of hours of shows that you've broadcast, you know, via collecting and trading videos. And it's just, so I feel like, even though I've never seen you live, I feel like I know you and I've just really enjoyed the work you've done over the years.
Well, bless your heart. Thank you very much, Tony.
I got to tell you, there's many different memories, but there's one particular one that I just enjoyed, and I wanted to see if you had remembered it. It's a classic, at least we think so amongst the friends that have watched this. It was back in 1985, and you had two kids, like from Miami, I guess 2 high school guys who were there to present the tag team of the
Pete
year.
Lederberg and Howard Baum. I know those guys.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go through the story. I remember this thing distinctly. What you're going to say?
So it was for the award for 1984, and then Eddie Gilbert comes out and thanks the guys for the award, but starts kind of ripping on Tommy Rich because he's a big star and he doesn't come around anymore. And he's really ripping on him, and then Tommy Rich comes out with his blue suit on and just, beats the heck out of Eddie Gilbert. And you guys go to commercial, Lance. And then you come back from commercial, and there you are interviewing a bloody Eddie Gilbert, blood everywhere. And he just gives you this sob story about how he feels bad for what he did. And basically, you give him the old, it takes a better man, Eddie, to admit your mistakes. And then finally, Tommy comes out, and they make up, and everything's fine. And then as soon as Tommy turns around, Eddie gives it to him. And the thing that I just enjoyed so much about
Tommy Rich was bleeding all over the place.
The thing I enjoyed so much about it was how mad you portrayed to be in that, more so than I think anybody else was. How Tommy had gotten over, or Eddie had gotten over on you. I just thought it was just a tremendous scene. Do you remember that one?
Well, yeah, I remember part of it. I don't remember as much detail as you said, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, Tony, because I hadn't thought about it in quite some time. And we had several instances with Eddie that were memorable, and that was one of them, and with Tommy too, needless to say. And so I thank you very much for bringing that back to my all of the detail back to my mind.
Oh, I'm sure there's, in the grand scheme of things, it's probably just a small thing, but I don't know. I just thought it was just a classic studio episode of wrestling from down there. Everything I've ever seen you.
Pardon me. I'm glad you said studio episode because it's just what we were talking about, Dave, a little bit ago. I think that kind of thing is what comes over so well in a small setting as opposed to working in front of 10,000 people. Pardon me, Tony, go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask you, from watching wrestling from the late 70s to now, I enjoyed it then, I enjoyed it now, but I think the one thing that's missing now when I watch wrestling from back then is I think back then there was more real hatred between the fans and certain wrestlers, the bad guys, the heels. And I don't think that you really have that today. Do you think that's true, or?
I think there's no question. Yeah, I think there's no question it's true.
Yeah. I was going to say Tony would be in a better position to know than I would because because of the area that I live in, and we don't have that many matches, and two, I just haven't been to that many matches recently. But it certainly is my impression that is exactly right on. You hit it on a button. It absolutely is true.
Yeah, I mean, I don't go to matches, and the hatred thing isn't there. Like if you look at with the top heels like it was, and it's, I mean, in a sense maybe it's better because those guys aren't getting their tires slashed when they leave the building, like a lot of the which was not unusual in the old days, so to speak.
Right.
But it's a different. The audience is there. The audience is there to be entertained, whereas the older audience, it was so much more emotional. I mean, it was every little move and nuance would get a reaction because they were watching this thing seriously. I mean, now it's like, again, it's like the big stuff and the pantomime and all that is what they're into because they're looking for the guys to do something to entertain them, as opposed to win the match or, vanquish the heel or whatever it would be.
Dave, we started going to ECW Arena back in like 94, 95, and a big group of people here from New York we weren't even going to the shows here for a while, WWF, WC, whatever. And that was one of the things that we liked so much about going to that arena. It was like old time, real emotion in that building that you just don't get in the, there's different types of emotion, but you felt like at any moment a riot almost could break out when you used to go there. And I think that's the way it was back in, the very late 70s, early 80s when I used to go to the Garden, at Madison Square Garden. There used to just be some real emotion in the building, a different type. It's more of like a rock concert type of a show type as opposed to
see the stars come to your town.
The closest I ever got to that was that one AAA show down before Bash of the Beach.
Oh, in L.A.
Yeah.
They had the earlier triple.
Insane.
The earlier before that one, because I was at that one, Brian. The original AAA show at the L.A. Sports Arena, the one that sold out and turned all those people away. That may have been the most heated show that I ever was at in my life, and scariest audience. I mean, like no one got hurt, but you were at this thing when, like, especially when Art Barr was out there or Jake Roberts, that there was like at any moment there could be a riot. Thankfully, there never was, and I mean, in fact, and I remember Jake Roberts and Paige. I mean, I don't know. In fact, we should talk to Paige about this one. I remember Paige and Jake Roberts back to back, and this was no act. Just waiting because they didn't know what was going to happen next. Mm-hmm. And the next night, they were in San Diego. This was after the show that I'm talking about. It was Jake Roberts, it was Paige, and they had this big, fat bodyguard with them that they didn't have before. And I just think that, it was like when they came to the ring. I mean, San Diego wasn't nearly as bad as L.A., but I think that they were from L.A. I think they were scared out of their mind and knew that they may need help the next night.
Last comment on Memphis, Lance.
Yeah.
Another one was a tag team match between the Rock and Roll Express and the Papos.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed unusual to me because at the end of that, the Macho Man pile drove Ricky Morton through the table, which you didn't. I don't know. Maybe it's just it didn't seem like there was a lot of that going on in the early '80s, and that was another situation there. Like it seemed like if the fans could have climbed over that guardrail to get the Papos as they tried to get them out of that building, they would have definitely have done something to them.
Yeah. Well, you're right about that. During that whole period of time, and it started because it came out of a real event, and that was with Angelo and Randy and the guys coming in trying to take over the territory in Memphis. And so what I'm saying, that all came out of a real event, and then of course we were at that time making inroads into the Lexington deal in Rupp Arena and drawing some pretty good crowds there, and that was their home base. What I'm saying to you is the fact that came out of that kind of climate, and I think that's the reason why the reaction to it was so real and sudden and violent, because it came out of a violent situation.
I want to bring up two things, and we got a full bank of calls, so I want to get to them as well.
Okay.
Cut me off
if I get too long, Dave.
No, it's okay. I remember early on, Memphis wrestling. This is I'm going to the early '80s now.
Okay.
Became this classic video when people first started getting videotape recorders. The people started trading wrestling tapes because in those days, the Memphis show would be in 5 or 6 markets. I mean, it was in Nashville, Louisville, Lexington, probably a couple of others, Evansville.
Right.
You had those people in those cities see it. Nobody else ever saw it, and that was like it was everywhere. San Francisco wrestling, you saw in San Francisco, Sacramento, Fresno. Nobody else saw it. And then videotapes came in, and the real hardcore fans, and that's where I was involved, we started trading videos. And the Memphis ones and the Japanese tapes were like the big thing, some of the Carolinas. There were other territories as well. Mid-South was a big deal. But I remember, what was that like? I mean, you had always done wrestling for this regional thing, and I mean, I know you were aware of it early on, that there were people all over the country all of a sudden watching your shows. I mean, not a lot of them, but they were there.
It really, and I can relate this, if I may, to a situation that took place when I went with WCW and started traveling around doing 900 number stuff, radio type stuff of broadcasting for the WCW 900 number. And I went in one example was I went into Boston and we're in the arena and maybe an hour before, and I'm sitting up there and we're getting our equipment around, and people started coming up and talking to me, you know, and I'm thinking, well, what? Are you from Marks, Mississippi, or what? I mean, no, I've seen some of the tapes, and it was just a absolutely mind-blowing experience to, as you said, be the ringmaster over about 5 markets in the Mid-South around there, and then having these people come up and start talking and ask, as Tony mentioned about a specific incident, start asking about particular incidents that took place on shows, and it was, frankly, it was great. It made me feel more alive. I really do believe.
Well, I wanted to bring up, because we started talking right before the break about the whole situation with Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo and Angelo Poffo, and Jerry Jarrett and Angelo Poffo were in a really nasty promotional war, and when they settled it, they did some big business together with Jerry Lawler against Randy Savage. Talk a little bit about the background, because that's some. I mean, the Poffos would go on TV, and I mean, they said stuff that you weren't supposed to say in those days about.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember. I mean, they were talking about breaking kayfabe. I mean, they would, they were running down guys and.
Oh, they were giving everybody's real name, which, as you know, back in those days was a really big deal. You had, I mean, today, so it still is in some respects, but not like it was then. And they were going on there, and they would talk about Tojo Yamamoto and his real name and where he was really from, and
he wasn't Japanese, and
yeah, that's right. And it was a situation where they were on. They wouldn't appreciate me saying this, but we referred to it from old radio days as a little tea kettle, and nobody was watching the station or their show. And I'm not saying this to put myself over. I'm long since past that, I think, but or maybe not. I don't know. But anyhow, I had to disagree and argue with some of the folks running the show there, because they had all they wanted to have and wanted to get on there and start firing back at these guys on the air. And it obviously would have been the most stupid thing in the world, because of the audience that we had going at that time. They didn't even know who these people were, and that was their only source. If we started talking about them and recognizing them, that was the only way in the world that they were ever going to get any kind of attention. And so cooler heads prevailed, and we did not do that. But it was really nasty. And I'm telling you, I went, and this was the strangest. Stop me, Dave, because this is a fairly long story. Dave Brown went with me the first time on the road. He and his wife Margaret and my wife Audrey, and we went up in the van to do a show at Rupp Arena up there, and it was the first time Dave came. And the minute I stepped out of the van in the parking lot behind Rupp Arena, I hear this, "Hey, Russell, you're going to get us kicked off of another show or station?" And I'm like, and who is it but Randy? And, well, anyhow, I'll leave out part of it. But it really, looked nasty. I mean, they were there. A guy had already been arrested earlier. One of their guys had been arrested for coming in an area the police told him to stay out of, and all of that. And they went up and had a big brouhaha in the court, and they got fined. He got fined, and so on. So a lot of really bad blood. Dave and I were the only two guys in the backstage Rupp Arena that didn't have a piece. I'm talking gun, because when we started across that freeway, that toll road, and how in the world would I ever forget it, going over to 65 to go down to Nashville, when we got ready to bail out of there, we had done the show, and they had bought tickets and come in, and we had the security all alerted about keeping them in their seats, and I mean, really tension. Man, you can't believe the tension. And when we started out and went backstage, and Dave and I were getting ready to collect our wives and head out to the van and go in, and Sonny King, you remember Big Sonny by any chance?
Oh, I remember Sonny King, sure.
Oh, let me tell you, pure and simple, one of the toughest guys outside the ring I have ever known in my life. He was a hunk of man, I'm telling you that. Let me lead the way, Sonny says, going across that paved toll road going over to 65 from Lexington. And we went back in there, and all we heard were hammers being checked and cylinders being checked for bullets. I mean, guns were popping up everywhere because the word was that they were going to jump us going across that desolate road going over to 65. And that was the last time Dave ever went on the road with me.
Yeah, he didn't need that.
Pardon me for getting off into that. There's a lot more to it, but it really was vicious. And the interesting thing, I will say this, once they put together a deal, Angelo and Jarrett put together a deal in there, it was so intense and so real that it is my feeling that's what killed Lexington as a super town for us.
Really?
I think that was the actual reason, because all of this stuff about Randy and the stuff that was when they put it together, and of course the first night, holy mackerel, Lawler.
Oh yeah, Jerry Lawler, Randy Savage, the first night in Lexington is the record.
Oh, jeez, unbelievable. I mean, it was just unbelievable. But all of that, and it was so intense and so truthful and all, and I don't mean shoot interviews. What I mean is real. I mean, all the stuff that was being said. And the people then got to see, as time went on, the cracks came down and they couldn't keep the intensity up, and they got to see that, maybe this was all a big plot that Randy had done where they could draw people into Rupp and all of that. Anyhow, I personally think that's what ended Rupp as being a regular once-a-month super town to come over.
Based on that story we're talking that Lance was just telling everyone, I want to make mention, for those of you who collect old videos, one video I would go out of my way to get would be the first appearance in the Memphis TV studio of Randy Savage, because his story brought that to mind. That thing, which was at that point already an angle, but built up by, a year plus, or I don't know how long it was, of what was not an angle, and they were playing off of that stuff in the angle. I mean, you're watching this TV and you're thinking, I remember watching this, and I knew that at that point it was already an angle, and yet you're just watching Randy Savage, and that was an unbelievable performance by Randy Savage.
Boy, I want to tell you, Dave, and I'll say this very quickly, because I do want to get this across, that I was scared to death of Randy Savage. I mean, you're talking about Scott Tyner. I thought Randy Savage was going to break my neck, and as it turned out, Randy, when he left there and went on, he came up, man, as a real man, and said, hey, you didn't have to be nice to me, you didn't have to do a straight job with me, I appreciate it, and he was, what a great guy. Man, he was scary.
Yeah, that was what it was like. So anyway, let's go to Bud in Pennsylvania. Bud, what's going on?
Hey, Dave, big fan of yours.
Thank you.
I was calling to talk about the Rob Van Dam story today.
Yes.
I was wondering what the deal was.
As far as
well, you said earlier, and you had up the story that he had quit 3 weeks ago. Then I went to Pro Wrestling Torch and One Wrestling, and they had said there was an anonymous email that said he quit 3 weeks ago, and they checked the sources and said he still hasn't quit yet. He's thinking about it. I was just wondering, do you just run any stories with emails?
I had talked to 5 different people, 3 of whom were very close to Rob, and they said that he had quit, and Rob had told people he had quit, and he told many of his friends that he had quit. Technically, he has not quit, but it had nothing to do with an anonymous email.
Well, I mean, that's what everyone else is reporting, and that he hasn't quit, and they got the information.
Well, there were other people who reported that he did quit too, but it didn't have to do with it had nothing to do with an anonymous email.
Oh, well, it just seemed like you'd run a story like.
I wouldn't run a story based on an anonymous email.
Okay, and like the Fabulous Muller's in a porno or something, run that email or something.
I never ran anything like that.
I know. It just seemed because everyone else had the anonymous email. I was just checking to see where you're coming from, 'cause I'm a big fan of you.
Oh, I was all night last night. I was talking to people who were, that's pretty much what I was doing yesterday afternoon and all night was talking to different people about the Van Damme thing. I mean, because
Did you talk to Paul Heyman? Because they had.
I talked to Paul. I talked to Paul Heyman. Yeah.
And did he tell you that he wasn't fired?
Paul Heyman told what Paul Heyman told me I can't say because he insisted everything was off the record.
Oh,
if it was, I would print a quote from him. He told me that he would not say anything on the record, but I talked to Paul Heyman, yeah.
Okay. And I just had a question for Lance Russell.
Yes, sir.
Could you do your famous they put the flag on the cowboy quote?
Put the flag on the cowboy. I don't know this one.
Whoa, I'm.
Are you sure? That's Jim Ross. That was Jim Ross. Oh, forget it. Let's go to Dave in Cincinnati.
How you doing?
Doing really good.
Dave.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to call in tomorrow, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to. So I had a question about Missy Hyatt. I don't know, maybe Lance or you could answer.
Uh-huh.
All right. Shortly after Jim Crockett Promotions bought the UWF, several people went to Jim Crockett Promotions, including like Sting, Rick Steiner, Eddie Gilbert, Terry Taylor. However, the one-man gang went to Titan Sports, and so did Missy Hyatt.
So did Ted DiBiase.
Yeah, but I think he was in Japan at the time, wasn't he?
Ted was in Japan when the sale went down, yeah.
Okay, yeah, my question wasn't Missy, I remember, didn't Missy Hyatt, I mean, you reported in the Observer at that time that Missy Hyatt was going to go to the WWF, and I believe she even showed up at a TV taping. Wasn't she supposed to replace Piper's Pit? What exactly?
Yeah, Missy's Manor, they did a couple of them, they weren't that good, and Missy just kind of lost her job in the WWF.
Is that what
But
happened?
yeah, Missy Hyatt was going to be brought in and she was going to be a big deal, and I'm not sure exactly what went down. I just remember that people were disappointed and it just never materialized. But yes, it was a big deal when she was brought in, and she was brought in for a big push.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was, this has been a very busy week, but I will send you that tape of the WCW Classics episode.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched when I watched that old footage that they show from like the early '80s, it's just amazing, like how much heat that even some of the undercard matches had. Like to go back and watch like a simple run in back then, you would have like a ton of heat, and it was like a big deal. But now it's just, when you watch on like WWF Raw that there's a basic run in it, just doesn't even mean anything.
Well, it's because it happens with such frequency, and there's so much television product. When you have 1 hour of wrestling a week on TV or 2 hours, it's a lot different than the number of hours that you have now.
But also that fans were conditioned to watch squash matches, so when something happened, I mean, even if it was a mid-carder, the fans would go nuts.
Yeah, I mean, TV tapings, because the TV tapings were very formula. And you have two top guys going against each other on TV. The fans were ready for something to happen, and so they reacted to everything.
So, I mean, I don't even know if this is such a smart move to air this footage. I mean, because this footage is basically being aired in markets such as the Carolinas and Georgia, and these are like the WCW's loyal audience. And for them to see like what WCW used to be 20 years ago, I mean, you've got clips of these Piper and Flair interviews, and then to see
I know, and compare it to the stuff now.
Bad.
I know. That was one of the reasons why I think
definitely get away with it because the mid '80s period, it was a much slower WWF.
Well, they kind of did that with the best of Nitro too, right before Russo and Bischoff came back, and they had all this Nitro footage from 3 or 4 years ago that was just
it was so hot.
Yeah, and then it's like these guys are going to come back, and if they didn't recreate that, everyone's going to think they failed, and of course it was impossible to.
Whenever I see footage of that old set of Nitro, is it just me, or is that old set actually better than the new set?
It was better.
Yeah, whenever I see footage of something from the old set, I always think of the glory days of WCW.
Dave, we got to get running because we got a lot of calls to get to, okay?
Okay.
All right, let's go to Dennis in Missouri. Dennis.
Hey, Dave.
Hey.
First of all, I just want to thank you, Mr. Russell. As a totally blind person who's been a wrestling fan for 25 years, I've always appreciated your ability to describe what's going on in the ring.
Well, thank you, Dennis. That's
My
very kind
question is, how much do you think that the car accident that Eddie Gilbert was involved in affected his career? Because it seemed like at the time right before he had it, he was really starting to take off and go places. And after that, it didn't really seem like to me he ever got another chance.
Well, I think that it affected it a lot, and I'm not really certain from the standpoint that you're talking about. I think the pain that Eddie had out of it was one of the problems that resulted from it, that stayed with him. And there's no question you are right that was kind of a point of demarcation for Eddie right there, when he was going back and had that automobile accident.
I guess what I was getting at is that Eddie Gilbert always to me seemed like a person who had tremendous charisma. He could either be a heel or a face and be the top one, either one, but he never seemed to get another chance to prove himself after the car accident.
Now I think Eddie's best years as far as a push were actually after, because the car accident was '83, and he was like a young guy in the business. When by '83, he was only 22 years old.
That's right.
So he had chances, but I think that, the pride thing what Lance said is the problem stemming from the pain he was in the car accident probably hurt him from getting as far as he probably would have gotten. If there had not been a car accident, it probably would have changed. But I thought his best success, I don't think there's any question his best success came after, because his best success would have been, what would you say on it? A little bit WCW, and that's late 80s, although Continental when he was booking it himself, and then maybe the early, right before ECW in that period, he was kind of a big cult favorite, or what was the name of that promotion before ECW, the TWA, where Eddie Gilbert and Cactus Jack had those memorable matches? Mm-hmm. So, but Eddie, he, what's the word I'm looking for? He was in a lot of pain, and that, you could talk to Missy Hyatt about Eddie, because she was there. She knows better than probably anyone.
She'll be on tomorrow, right, Dave?
And she'll be on tomorrow, yeah.
The other question I have is, I've tried to describe him to people, and I don't think I've ever done him justice. To me, Joe LeDoux was one of the greatest heels that I can ever remember.
Mm-hmm.
In Memphis, Lance, tell everyone about the Blood Oath.
Boy, that was, he comes out there, and this is live television with that small studio audience and the intimacy that we talked about. And Joe comes out, and a lot of you may have seen the tape, and he's going against Lawler, and he's talking about how, I'm going to take a blood oath that I'm going to kill you, Lawler, and he takes this double-edged axe, and this is just as straight up happened exactly the way it came off. I almost died when I saw it. He takes this axe, drags it across his forearm, and slits his arm wide open. The blood starts pouring down, and we say, take a break. It was, whoa, it was something. And LeDuc did it because he just got into that thing. That's the way he was.
Didn't he also do something to Lawler's leg with an axe? I know it was to set up a time when Lawler was actually hurt, but I seem to recall him doing something to Lawler's leg with an axe.
Well, if he did, I don't relate it to the axe. I think the arm thing that he did to himself is so dominant as far as a memory goes that I may not remember it. No, I don't remember anything in relationship to the axe. I'm certain that it was used, but I don't remember anything that sticks in my mind about it.
My final question is, why didn't, and I know he wrestled a lot in Memphis, Buddy Landel seemed to be another person who never really seemed to get the chance he deserved.
Well, Dennis, I'm not knocking the guy. What I'm going to tell you is that I think a lot of times that was the result of maybe some inappropriate action, possibly on whoever's part you might be talking about. Landel, I thought, had as much pure talent. He could do it all. He could wrestle. He was not a great wrestler. He was a good wrestler. He was a great mouth. And don't you think, Davey, that he probably, in his particular case, that he may have gotten himself in...
Buddy Landel was his own worst enemy, and he'll be the first one to tell you.
Absolutely.
Because he's told me on many occasions that same thing. The thing with Buddy Landel, if you go to about the mid-1980s, whether it was in the Crockett promotion. I mean, he was on the verge of a big, big push, and because of cocaine, he couldn't get out of bed one day. When he was national heavyweight champion and about to shoot some big angle, I think with Flair or Dusty, which would have propelled him to that top level, and he just didn't get out of bed, and got fired. And in Memphis, I mean, I'll tell you what, memory I have is it was Jerry Lawler and I think Dutch Mantell against Bill Dundee and Buddy Landel week after week, probably around 85, 86, I'm not sure the year, where they were in Memphis. And, I mean, these were unbelievable matches. And Buddy Landel, at that point, was the best of the four. He just had tremendous gifts in the ring, but, you know, again, he self-destructed.
Yes, he did. It's exactly what happened.
I guess that's kind of a result of the changing times. If somebody had a drug problem like that, in these days you wouldn't know about it. I mean, I remember hearing stories about Gino Hernandez, but that was long after he passed away. You didn't hear about it.
Well, Gino came out because he died from a cocaine overdose, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, with Buddy's been very upfront about it. I mean, if you talk to him now, I mean, he'll admit to everything that he did in that period, and he'll admit to being a guy who, you know, hey, Buddy Landel should have been one of the biggest stars in the business.
Absolutely.
And it didn't happen, and, you know, he only blames himself. And unfortunately, a couple of times when he had a chance to make comebacks, he ended up getting injured because it was a little later, and he had a lot of bad luck, and he gave himself a lot of bad luck, and it was too bad because I'll tell you what, when it came to talking and everything, he had this tremendous knack for being able to get people to hate him.
Well, Dave, I know you had other phone calls. I'm really looking forward to Missy tomorrow.
Oh, good. Okay, well, let's go to Joe in West Virginia. Joe, you're next up.
Hey, it's an honor to everybody.
Hi.
Hey, Mr. Russell, I have one question.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Joe.
If you had one match you could have called a dream match, who would it have been and where would it have been? Like, who would have been in it and where would the match have been held?
Well, what almost took place, I would have really loved to have seen, because I probably am a lot higher, and that sounds demeaning to say it that way, but what I was going to say is I'm a lot higher on Jerry Lawler than a lot of people in the wrestling fan. I saw Lawler do stuff. I saw Lawler carry matches that were absolutely incredible. His mouth is, well, that's what he's doing now. They had originally set it up to have Ric Flair and Jerry Lawler meet.
Oh, yeah.
In a stadium match in Memphis. And there's a whole long story behind that, and we certainly don't have time to get into it. But it never took place, and I really am sorry about it, because you asked me a question, and that was a match that I was really looking forward to being able to call, was Jerry Lawler and Ric Flair. It could have been one of those kind that don't come along.
Two of the best characters ever.
Too many centuries. Huh?
Two of the best characters ever in wrestling.
Yeah.
I remember the one time, or maybe one time, Ric Flair, this probably was a prelude to that match not taking place. Ric Flair came into the Memphis studio. What a performance he put on.
Yeah.
And then they built up, they did a thing where Lawler beat him on a count, and it was obviously to build up a match. And, you know, whatever happened with the promotions, you know better than I. I just know that the match never took place.
That's right.
Yeah,
it did. Well, as I said, that's a long story, and we don't have near the time, Dave, to get into that.
Anything else, Joe?
No, I just want to thank you. It's a great show. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks
and,
for calling.
Okay, what was I going to say about that? There was another thing you were talking about with Lawler, is that Lawler, you talk about being able to carry people. I remember seeing clips. I didn't see the whole match. It was Lawler and Leon Spinks, and believe me, nobody ever got a good match out of Leon Spinks. And Lawler. I mean, I remember before that match, and Lawler was already kind of up in years, but still a good worker. And I remember, Lawler could talk people into buying tickets for Leon Spinks, and Leon Spinks was a world heavyweight boxing champion. He had credentials. But I thought when they got in the ring, this was going to be, even Jerry Lawler couldn't make a match, and somehow. I mean, nobody would even call it a good match by today's standards, but believe me, it was a great match for Leon Spinks, because I saw the stuff he did in Japan, and it was unbelievably bad.
He could do that. I'll tell you, it used to be almost an irritating thing with Jerry. This is in the latter days of me, after I left WCW and came back to Memphis and all. Jerry would take these green kids they were trying to make into attractions and all, and like almost do jobs, you know. I mean, it just was, and he was so great at it, but it had to wear away a little bit on his what people thought of him and how good he really was, because he just could do such a number with these young kids. It was great. It was just a masterpiece to watch him work.
We are like totally out of time, Lance. This was just a total pleasure, and we got to do this again. And talk about the next time we're on. We'll talk about that Lawler Ric Flair story. We'll get to the whole thing. Okay.
Okay, Dave. Thank you for helping an old man relive some great moments. You got some great fans, and I enjoy your stuff. You know that, and thank you again for having me on.
Yeah.